What's going on, everybody? Thanks for watching again. Today we're driving a 1987 Mercedes Benz 560 SL R107 chassis. So this is a pretty cool car. It's been modified, but in a way that kind of doesn't spoil the character of the car as it was originally. It just kind of improves upon it, makes it quite a bit sportier. So let's take it for a drive and see what it's all about. That sounds way better than any stock 560 SL. This was one of the longest running production cars around. I mean, this thing came out in 1971 and it was made up until 1989. So obviously Mercedes had a good thing when they first designed and engineered the car. It's still an impressive car. I mean, it drives, they're very solid feeling. The quality is typical Mercedes quality. Is very, very solid feeling car. They're definitely going up in value, especially one like this that I'm in, which is a 41,000 mile original factory car, factory paint, interior has not been restored. You know, something like this, 50,000 maybe, something like that. In stock form, you know, these cars they're pretty heavy. They're more like GT cars. So the owner of this car wanted to, he lives in California, he wanted to improve on the performance of it without, you know, kind of spoiling the inherent goodness of the chassis, which is, you know, this is a really nice car to drive, solid feeling, pretty luxurious, but he wanted to tighten it up a little bit, get a little more power out of it. And so he also lives in California, so he needed it to pass emissions. So it couldn't be anything too dramatic as far as the changes. So he ended up shipping the car to New Mexico, where there's a company called Carobu Engineering, and I've done some other reviews. I've done magazine stories about their cars over the years, and I've done some videos on their cars as well. They specialize in, they've done like a lot of high performance Ferraris, keeping them stock looking, but improving the performance. Big bore, like 3.5 liter 308s and things like that. They've done modified Daytonas, Boxers, all sorts of stuff. And so they've kind of branched out into doing Mercedes as well. He sent the car here and they did what is considered, what they call their Stage One tuning program, which basically amounts to a really nicely designed and developed set of bolt-on modifications. So the internals on this car are not changed. It's got the original pistons, the original 9:1 compression ratio. All the bottom end is all stock, and so the work that they did to it mainly involved like basically improving the airflow of the engine to get more horsepower and torque. So the first thing they did was they converted the air intake to a dual snorkel setup. Normally the 560 SL has a single side intake, so to get more air into the engine they converted it to what is used on the 560 SEC Coupe, which has more power from the factory, or had more power from the factory, and it's got a dual snorkel air intake. So they did a modified intake manifold, and they cut it and section it in a certain way. They don't really like to give away exactly what they do, but basically cutting it and sectioning it allows the air to go much more directly and efficiently into the engine. They did custom camshafts, so it's got custom ground camshafts. The engine also has a set of custom headers that are they're tri-Y headers, and they're sourced in Eastern Europe, I believe is where they're made. So it's got custom tubular headers, and then it's got a stainless steel exhaust with an X pipe. It's got the original Bosch CISK fuel injection, but they converted it to standalone electronic fuel management, basically. So they're able to program it throughout the entire rev range, and it just runs that much better, basically. After all the modifications, they ended up with about 315 pound-feet of torque, and then horsepower went up from about 230 to about 280. So now it's about 280 horsepower, so a pretty good improvement there as well. Larger front and rear sway bars, 20% larger on the front, 50% larger on the rear, which makes the back end come out a little better, rotates better when you go into a corner. And then it has lowering springs all around, and it has on the rear, they actually put adjustable trailing arm bushings that allow you to dial in the alignment, because normally on an SL you can't align the rear end, and so they made it so you can align it with these adjustable bushings. Exterior modifications were pretty minor. It's got, like I said, original factory paint. They did add lighter Euro bumpers, which shed some pounds, and then they also look way better than the big US bumpers, and Euro headlights, which both of those modifications actually reduce weight a little bit. So the last thing they did to the exterior for performance as well as a visual upgrade, they installed 16 by 8 inch wheels from Maxilite, which is a company in Germany, and they look like the original Mercedes wheels, but they're larger and you can fit larger tires on there. They make a really big difference, actually. This has got Michelin like Super Sport all-season tires, so they're nothing too extreme, but they handle really good. They grip nicely. So those are the changes basically to the car. It's got a lowered stance. It looks great. The bigger wheels fill it out, but it still looks like you see it, and you're kind of like, it looks like it could be stock, but then you kind of, you clock the lower ride height and the bigger wheels. So the changes basically have resulted in a much more sure-footed and quicker SL. So yeah, engine is a lot more responsive, and paired with handling that way more sure-footed. Yeah, it takes an SL from being just sort of entertaining to drive to actually fun to drive. But listen to that engine. I mean, it's still not the kind of car you can really chuck around because you just never get away from the weight. But now, normally you get into a back road like this in an SL like this, an R107 chassis, and you're not really going to be wanting to push it that hard. But this one, you can push it harder. And it's just, basically it feels like a German muscle car, which is what it is. It's planted, relatively sure-footed, and it's just got a pretty good amount of horsepower and torque. An automatic is just a little more difficult to hustle down a back road. And the engine character, it's typical, European V8. It revs really smoothly all the way up. You don't really need to take it past 5,000. That's peak horsepower. Very entertaining to drive. It's definitely like a slow in, fast out kind of car though. Basically this just takes the basic R107 and just makes it, wow, this is actually surprisingly fun to drive. Once you get into the rhythm of it, I mean, you got to be mindful of the weight transfer for sure. You can't really do anything too, sudden when you're entering the corner because it just doesn't, it just starts to move around a lot. The brake feels good. They're a little, it's a, typical Mercedes. They're a little overboosted. They work pretty well considering how heavy the car is. They definitely slow it down. So as far as the driving position, this just goes for all R107 chassis cars. It's a little upright. It's kind of cramped in here. It's not the biggest interior. It kind of takes some getting used to. It feels very vintage. You can tell that it was engineered in the late 60s because it has that sort of kind of upright feel to it. It's not very laid back. Steering wheel's pretty massive. It's definitely got a big steering wheel. I love the way the gauges look. The black with the orange center, numbers in the middle. I mean, if this car had been like this from the factory, it would have been considered like, a pretty impressive performance car, not just a good luxury GT car. Visually, the car, I mean, this is styling-wise, it's a great-looking car. Really, really well proportioned. It's got a long hood, and so when you sit in it, you kind of get that impression where you're sitting like over the back axle, and then you got this long hood. It's an interesting design because it's very it's like a brick, but it's like all in the details and the proportions when you think about it. The long hood, I love the way the hardtop looks in these. It's a classic looking hardtop. Yeah, you can sort of imagine this car is probably in line with like a really nicely tuned, 80s era AMG 560 SL, and basically taking the the basic ingredients and just sharpening them up, and you end up with a pretty spectacular car.